Vistam 151, go around.
Go around, Vistam 151.
Vistam 151, heavy, thanks. The last departure lost the wheel on departure, so we're going to have to shut the runway down. So fly runway heading and maintain 3000.
Roger, Vistam 151.
Omnicon 7 heavy, we're going to have to...
Welcome to Brasher Warning, the podcast that dives deep into aviation incidents with sharp analysis, insightful discussions, and just a touch of edge. If you're passionate about aviation and love a good post-incident breakdown, you're in the right place. Before we take off, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your crew. Let's get into it.
Picture this. You're a passenger on what you think is just a normal flight, maybe grabbing a drink, settling in for the trip, when suddenly the plane takes a nosedive and it's not turbulence.
Yeah, it's terrifying to even imagine.
Absolutely, and that was the horrifying reality for everyone on board Germanwings Flight 9525 back in 2015.
It's a tragedy that really exposed the complexities of pilot mental health and how crucial it is to aviation safety, a connection we often overlook.
And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today with this case and some really insightful research from Biomed Central.
We're aiming to unpack this whole thing. How do we balance aviation safety with the human element, the mental well-being of the pilots?
That's a tough question, and this Germanwings crash, it really shook the aviation world.
The official report from the French BEA, they're the ones who investigated the crash, concluded that the co-pilot, he was struggling with severe depression, and he deliberately crashed that plane.
It wasn't a mechanical failure, nothing like that.
Nope, it was a deliberate act, and that's what makes this so disturbing.
And the report, it goes into some really chilling details, like this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing.
Right, this was planned.
The co-pilot, he had been researching suicide methods and even cockpit door security.
It's scary how much thought went into it.
It's haunting, and it makes you wonder, what could have been done? Was there any way to prevent this?
Especially because the co-pilot's history of depression, it wasn't a secret, it was documented.
So then how do we balance medical confidentiality, which is so important, with aviation safety?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's something the aviation industry has been grappling with ever since.
It makes you think, how much self-reporting is enough from pilots? Is an annual checkup really enough when so much is at stake?
We're talking about people's lives here.
Exactly, and that's what makes this conversation so critical. It's like this crash really forces us to confront a disturbing truth about how we think about pilot incapacitation.
Totally, and it exposes a huge gap in the system, something called the 1% rule.
Oh, I've heard of that, but explain it for our listeners. What's the 1% rule all about?
So imagine a worst-case scenario. A pilot has a heart attack mid-flight, right?
Scary thought, but it happens.
It does, and that's where this rule comes in. It's a risk assessment, basically saying there's a 1% chance of that happening, but the other pilot can take over, land the plane safely.
Okay, so it assumes the other pilot is healthy and all that.
Exactly. It's all about physical incapacitation.
But, and this is a big but, that's not what happened in this case.
Not at all. And that's the flaw with the 1% rule. It doesn't account for intentional harm.
Right, a heart attack is one thing, but when a pilot chooses to do something harmful, that throws the whole calculation off.
Completely, and it highlights how this rule, it just doesn't address mental health at all.
It's like comparing apples and oranges.
And that brings up another almost impossible question. How do you even quantify the risk of something like suicide in a pilot population?
It's not like you can run a diagnostic test.
Not at all. It's human behavior, and that's the most unpredictable thing there is. Plus, you have the issue of underreporting because of the stigma.
Pilots aren't exactly lining up to say, hey, I'm struggling.
Right. So the data we do have, it's probably just the tip of the iceberg, which is really concerning.
Which brings us to that Biomed Central study, right?
Yeah.
They dove into this whole thing.
Yeah, they surveyed a whole bunch of commercial pilots, and a surprisingly high percentage of them, they admitted to having depressive symptoms.
Wow, that's significant.
It is, but here's the kicker. They weren't seeking help for it.
And that's the scariest part, because we know pilots are under immense pressure, the long hours, the responsibility, it's got to take a toll.
For sure. And then you add the stigma of mental health on top of that. It's no wonder they hesitate to speak up.
And it's not just the stigma. The report on the Germanwings crash, it's that the co-pilot, he was facing huge financial penalties if he was grounded for health reasons.
It's a lose-lose situation for them. Their dream job, their income, it's all tied to their health, both physical and mental.
It's tragic. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the Biomed study backs that up.
Totally. A lot of pilots avoid getting help because they're terrified of being grounded. It's a huge risk for them.
It's a tough spot to be in, and it makes you think about the doctors treating these pilots too.
Oh, absolutely. They're in a tough position, bound by patient confidentiality, but also they have a duty to protect the public.
Talk about a moral dilemma. How do you find that balance? Protecting the individual versus potentially preventing a tragedy.
It's one of the toughest calls, and a lot of countries, they do allow doctors to break confidentiality if there's a serious risk to others.
Which makes sense, but it's still a gray area.
Big time. There's no easy answer, and the Germanwings report, they touch on this. Even with stricter reporting rules, there's no guarantee it would have changed the outcome.
It's a sobering thought, and it makes you realize this isn't just about one pilot, one crash. It's a systemic issue.
You got it, and that's why the focus has shifted towards bigger picture solutions, changing the culture within aviation.
So less about reinforced cockpit doors and more about addressing the root causes.
Exactly, because those physical measures, they're important, but they don't solve the underlying problem.
Okay, so what's the solution then? What needs to happen?
It boils down to creating an environment where pilots, they feel safe to speak up, to seek help, without jeopardizing their entire career.
That's huge. We're talking about a major culture shift.
We are, but it's got to start somewhere, and the report, they highlight peer support programs as a good first step.
Those are so important, having someone who gets it, who's been there.
Right, a safe space to talk, to share those struggles without judgment, knowing you're not alone in this.
That feeling of being understood, of having a support system, it can make all the difference.
Totally, and beyond those peer groups, we need more resources specifically for pilots, counseling, therapy, things like that, stuff that addresses their unique stressors.
Because their job, it's unlike any other. The level of responsibility is immense.
You said it, and that's why it's crucial they have access to mental health care that's tailored to their needs without the fear of losing everything.
It's like we're finally starting to see mental health and physical health as equally important, which is a huge step in the right direction.
It is, and for pilots especially, prioritizing their well-being, it protects them, but it also protects everyone on board those planes.
Exactly. It's that interconnectedness that we sometimes forget. And this deep dive, it's really highlighted that connection.
It's been eye-opening for sure.
It has, and it's a lot to process. But hopefully it's given our listeners a better understanding of the challenges and the potential solutions.
I hope so too, because this conversation, it goes way beyond aviation. It's about how we support the mental health of everyone, especially those in high-stress jobs.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, this has been a really heavy but important deep dive into a tragic event that raised some really crucial questions. So thank you for joining us on this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Brasher Warning. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a flight with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment or review, and don't forget to share the podcast with your fellow aviation enthusiasts. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and keep soaring.
American 1552, contact center 127.0. 1552, we're going to be Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We have an engine failure. We're going to return to DFW. 1552, roger. And which runway do you need? We'll take 18 right. Roger, make 1552, turn right heading 020, just going to maintain 8,000.